Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Brandon Kutchkoden, a reporter here at Forbes, here to tell us why law firms could be private equity's next conquest. Thank you so much for joining me today, Brandon.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, Brandon, there were three main players in your story about this topic. It was Eric Pacifici, Lee Minkoff, and Eric Shu. So, we're going to start off with Eric Pacifici. Could you tell us who he is and what prompted Eric to explore entrepreneurship through acquisition as an alternative to traditional law practice?
Yeah, so Eric's the founder of SMB Law Group, and what they do is they specialize in small business acquisitions, and that's not them buying companies, but helping people in their negotiations, the contracts, if they want to buy a small business. So think of things like, a person wanting to buy like an HVAC business or a plumbing business or something like that. Their law group steps in and, helps with the negotiations, all that sort of stuff. Um, and the way he came to that was, he was an associate at some pretty big law firms, Kirkland and Ellis among them, the biggest law firm in the country. And yeah, I think he was just, he was tired of big law, as a lot of people do. They get burned out. He's got kids and wanted to spend more time with his family, wanted to be able to live where he wanted to. And he was exploring the small business space himself. He was thinking, maybe this is my way out. Maybe I buy, a company and run it and get out of law altogether. And he, as he was exploring that, he realized, like, wait, um, there's no, large law firms that are helping people across the country do this. And he was like, aha, maybe that's my way into this, into having my own business and still, staying in law. So,
Hmm.
like in 2022, he started SMB Law Group. And, as part of that, he's kind of taken a different path from a lot of lawyers in that he's built up a social media presence. He's got, 100 some thousand Twitter followers. It's a very engaging account. I mean, that's how I came across him. And yeah, through that, he's built up a pretty big practice already. They've helped negotiate over $1 billion in deals in a little over a year.
Well, Brandon, what challenges does Eric highlight regarding selling a law firm, and what are the key reasons behind the difficulty?
Yeah, I mean, so the big ones are, law firms. As you can tell from the names of law firms, they're usually named after the founders, the key partners. If you're selling a firm, it's what are you really buying? Law firms don't exactly have assets, like they're not other businesses. They don't have the assets are the people themselves. So if you're going to buy a law firm, one of the big problems is law doesn't allow non-compete agreements. So if you have a law firm, you go to sell it, you can't guarantee the buyer that the lawyers on staff are going to stay. There's really nothing you can do to prevent them from saying, "Oh, you just bought this business." Imagine they paid, a 2 or 3x multiple, which would be really high for law. There's nothing stopping one of those lawyers being like, "Wait, if it's worth this much, why don't I just go and start my own and try to cash in that way?" And I know some of these clients, why wouldn't they come to me instead of coming, or staying with this firm that's going to have new lawyers and new ownership?
Hmm.
So that's one problem. The other one is, kind of the big one that he's highlighting is, where does the money come from? Because the American Bar Association has this rule, it's called Rule 5.4, that says only lawyers can own law firms. And so there's no outside capital. It's all coming from other lawyers, which, lawyers obviously have money, but it's not that much money, like
Right.
it, there's just not that big pool of buyers as you'll find for other businesses. So, when a law firm goes to sell, the standard multiple is only like 1x, whereas, like an HVAC business will get 3, 4, or 5x. I mean, that's a huge difference. I mean, so that's one of the big, those are the two biggest problems.
Yeah. Speaking of Rule 5.4, I mean, in what ways do some legal professionals argue that it hinders innovation and access to capital in the legal sector?
Yeah. So basically, what they're saying is like without that outside cap. Well, okay. So I guess number one is the way law firms traditionally work is the money comes in, the money gets paid out to the partners, right? This is why it's a lucrative profession. You bring in the money, you yourself get it. So there's not necessarily a ton of investment back into the law firm, which means there's a lot of technological advancements that maybe haven't been taken up. And, it sort of sounds crazy, but things like back office technologies, library management, billing, you know, these sorts of things where like the argument is basically like these firms really haven't had to compete and to advance themselves in that way. And these are the type of things where like outsiders might be able to add additional capital to do those things. But the model itself doesn't necessarily incentivize it right now.
So let's move on to Lee Minkoff. Before we go into him, could you just give us a little background on who he is?
Yeah. So he's a private equity professional, Renovus Capital in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And what he specializes in there is legal tech. So he's helped put together deals for this umbrella company they've created called Harbor Global, and what they specialize in are these sorts of things I just talked about. So like billing management, intelligence services, things that things that like every other industry has already taken up, like putting your data in the cloud. Like there's some
Mm-hmm.
issues there with sensitivities because of law, and so there hasn't been great services. So they've you know put those sort of things together, and they're trying to build a single ecosystem that it's easy that law firms can go to, and someone will just you know handle all of that for them.
Well, Brandon, according to Lee, what potential benefits and opportunities does investing in law firms offer to private equity, and why might law firms returns be attractive to investors?
Yeah, so there's two big things. The first is pretty simple. Law has great margins. Like it's if you look at the IBIS World stats in there in the story, it's something like 20%. That's as good as software. Like that's pretty fat margins. Like running a law firm, the expensive part so far has been paying lawyers. Um, so there's that. I mean, there's money to be made. The other one, though, is why it's a perfect fit for private equity, which is that it offers or potentially offers uncorrelated returns, which is the reason a lot of people go to private equity investments anyway. So law is going to make money if the stock market's going up or if it's going down. And maybe the easiest example to think of is like if we're in a bull market, companies are doing acquisitions. They need lawyers to help with M&A activity and acquisitions. If the market's going down, companies might be going bankrupt or going through restructurings. Guess what? You need lawyers for that too. And then there's other things like, just on a personal level, like divorces don't really change if the market's going up or going down, which actually kind of counterintuitively, I found some data, I think it got cut from the story, but divorces actually tend to go down during during bad markets. You would think they'd go up as the stock market goes down, but it's actually slightly slightly different from that. Maybe because people don't want to pony up the money for a lawyer during those times.
Right,
Um,
and that joint income definitely helps.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's kind of the big idea for private equity is that no matter what the market's doing, like if you need a lawyer, you need a lawyer, and if the market's great, you need them for one thing. If the market's bad, you need them for another thing.
Well, moving on to the third player in your story, Eric Shu. Who is he, and what's his perspective on investing in law?
Yeah, Eric's a lawyer in Washington State, and he, like Eric, he runs a business that a law firm that specializes in small business acquisitions and helping people through that. Eric's a bit more critical about whether private equity would be interested. And his reasons, he makes a compelling argument because what he basically says is that because law is this traditional stodgy profession, um, that it's ripe for disruption, that it's just missed a bunch of technological advancements. There's things that haven't been implemented. And he thinks that basically once law firms do start implementing these things, and in our conversation, he highlighted AI, for example. He says basically when they implement these things, it's going to be much cheaper. You're going to need fewer lawyers, and law as a practice will be more commoditized than being this like specialty service. Like, of course, you'll still need lawyers for a big M&A acquisition, but for a lot of the like smaller firms, like your simpler things like divorce, for example, or like personal bankruptcy is probably a better example. He basically argues like, look, you probably in the near term future, you might not even need a lawyer. You might just need to go pull up a simple form, and an AI will do it for you. So he thinks the margins for law firms are going to go down because of technology, which if you believe the trends, what happens historically, that should be true. But to be seen.
Well, Brandon, let's talk about historical challenges. How does the historical evidence from Australia, England, and Wales challenge concerns about external investments compromising professional standards in the legal profession?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing would be, before answering that, is that what we've seen in those countries is that there hasn't been a huge flood of private equity, right? So it hasn't like totally remade the industry. The stats I saw were something like 10%. So substantial, but not like totally overtaking the industry. But what studies point to is that the firms that have these alternative business structures uh, do not see any higher complaints, and they don't have any higher rates of like legal incidents. Like they're not getting fined by regulators or anything at a higher rate than firms that are still owned wholly by lawyers. So I
Well,
mean,
Brandon,
at least what it points to there is that it doesn't necessarily change the ethical standards.
well, Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.